evening. I'm so grateful to be connecting with you. Every day. I have the same system. I never change anything between our classes, but somehow different gremlins creep into the system every day. Today it just would not let me connect to YouTube, but then it did. So thank God. I mean, I did a little resetting, and thank God it seems to be working now. So here we go. Okay. So today was a very intense day for me. It's a short daf, so I'll just take a minute to share a little bit. My day opened that after morning prayers at our shul, we had an event listening to a couple of guys, Roy and Idam Asaraf, who are brothers from Israel, who were both present at the Nova Festival on October 7th, and they told their story. I mean, it was so intense. I just went to listen. I just thought at the last moment, why don't I record this? So I made a video of it. It's not good quality. I was, sitting further back. I didn't have a microphone. I'm going to load it up to YouTube so that you guys can hear it if you're interested. Everybody really needs to hear these stories. And in fact, one of the brothers is collecting other miracle stories because both brothers feel that they experienced a miracle. And when you hear them tell it, I mean, just in short, one of the brothers, got there Saturday morning very early, was there for 20 minutes. Then the rockets started coming. They started to run. He and his wife were there together. She forgot her jacket inside. They went back to get the jacket. Because they went back to get the jacket, when they came out to the parking lot, a second exit had been opened from that parking lot. If they hadn't gone out that exit, they feel they would have been killed. Long story short, he and the wife were driving, and a bunch of cars of Israelis leaving the festival in front of them stopped and turned around to go back the other way. They didn't know why. They didn't understand what was happening. But Roy had this feeling, this instinct from Hashem, from God, to just keep going straight and not turn around like the rest of the crowd. He just felt it. And he kept going straight. And then there were two pickup trucks coming. At first they thought, oh, they're filled with soldiers, thank God. And then they realized that these soldiers had the green headbands. This was Hamas coming with Kalashnikovs. And like his instinct said, go. So, in a panic, pushing down his wife's head so that she would be low, ducking himself, terrified, his foot shaking on the accelerator to keep it going. And something came out. He's not a religious guy, okay? I mean, he was there on Shabbos, Simchas Torah, going to this festival. But something came out of him in that moment, and he's shouting, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu. As he's flooring it, the Hamas guys are shooting at his car. But thank God no one was hit, and they got past. His brother, who was caught in the festival, couldn't find his car keys. He joined some people. They were rushed. They couldn't get in cars. They were walking, running away into a field. After a while, realized that they were heading toward Gaza. Came back the other way. Were lost. Were disoriented. He saw so many people killed around him. They were hiding in a big cement pipe. They were found. They got away. Finally, he and 8 other people, 9 people, 2 of them with bullet wounds and tourniquets and nearly passing out, crammed into some tiny car, like a Toyota Corolla or something type of thing, and got out, but a 6-hour ordeal to get out. Roy lost 13 friends that day. Idam lost 17 friends that day. They both have friends who are still hostages in Gaza. And both young men, are just so grateful, and they've just been inspired to share their stories. They're traveling all over the world sharing their stories. They've both become shomer Shabbat. They're keeping Shabbos. Very interesting. One of them is wearing tzitzis, right? That's a biblical commandment that we wear the fringes on our garments. He doesn't always wear a kippah. He doesn't always have his head covered. In a sense, he's right. And, tzitzis is a written commandment in the Torah. Having your head covered is really a custom. I mean, it's an age-old custom that's acquired tremendous strength for observant Jews. But it is a phenomenon now in Israel. There's a lot of young men who are wearing tzitzis even though they don't keep their head covered. It was just very intense listening to these guys describe that ordeal and how they feel that they were saved by miracles. And Roy is collecting stories of other people who were saved by miracles that day. He's got 80 of them so far, people telling their stories and how they felt they were miraculously saved from this terrible attack. I was talking to my father about it as I was driving today, and he's like, we got to remember, 1,200 people murdered, massacred that day in a country of 10 million. So in a country like America, where we have 300 million people, imagine if 36,000 Americans were massacred by savages on the same day, how America would respond. People are telling Israel, don't defend yourself, don't go into Rafah. And now they go into Rafah, and they've already found 50 terror tunnels that go under into Egypt, where weapons have been transported in. Please God, may we soon see a day when this war is over with a secure and lasting peace for the Holy Land. We say Amen. And from there, the reason I'm wearing my Maganam gear is, because I'm a defender of my community. Maganam, you've heard me talk about it before. We're an organization of volunteers who have trained to use firearms. We're licensed security guards. I actually also just received my concealed carry permit, and we train constantly. I'm very strong on Second Amendment. But I think it's also consensus view about the Second Amendment that people who carry firearms should train really hard to know how to use them safely. God forbid we ever need them. So we did a whole lot of training this afternoon. Now I've come home and I'm so excited to share some Torah with you. It's a great daf today. And I'm sorry I was 5 minutes late getting on. That's not because I was late. It was just the weird electronics. Every day it's a new kind of bug that creeps into it. That's where we are today. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Yehuda in South Carolina, Guy in Ohio, Paul in the Great Northwest, Bella in Florida, John in Maine, Paula, Bill is in Mid-Missouri, Tom in PA, Melissa in Great Neck, Belle asking for prayers for my daughter who sustained a hand injury today and is slated for surgery tomorrow or the next day. Please God, grant a refuah shlema, a complete healing to Belle's daughter. Charles is tuning in from Omaha, Shandora in the Bronx, Joe in the Inland Empire, Karen in Northern California. Yehudit, some information I read today that 700 tunnels have been found so far. Can you imagine if when the billions of dollars that poured in of humanitarian aid from the world to this community in Gaza had been used to build up the infrastructure of Gaza? It's not so crowded, and this nonsense about Gaza as an open-air prison. Yeah, it's a seaside, beautiful beach area, Mediterranean beach. It could so easily have been a Dubai, like the Greek Isles. I mean, they could have anything. they could have a trading partner in Israel. They could build themselves up and be an incredible, beautiful place and a thriving, prosperous community of people living, and instead they just, let's say their corrupt leadership chooses to only build, terror infrastructure and not accept that the Jewish homeland can exist and therefore keep mounting attacks and using their own people as human shields where they consider it a win if more of their people get killed because that's some kind of PR victory. I don't think I can express my disgust strongly enough for that leadership. Okay, please, I'm sorry. Chaim in Florida, Ella's in the house. Let's learn some Torah. Okay, we're in Tractate Bava Metzia, the 22nd volume of the Talmud, continuing our journey through chapter 6. We're at the very top of page 80a with Mishna number 3 here in chapter 6. So with regard to one who rents a cow and a plow, right, the way, your spider sense tingles a little bit. Don't you rent an ox to pull a plow? But the Mishnah says a cow, a para. So you rent a cow with regard to one who rents a cow and a plow in order to plow on the mountain. But he plowed in the valley. Okay, so that just like what we were talking about yesterday, if you rented a donkey in order to transport a load over a mountain, but you took the donkey into a valley, or you told the owner that you would take the donkey into the valley and instead you took it into the mountain, right? So you've changed the terms of the rental agreement. So here, one rented a cow and a plow in order to plow on a mountain, but instead he plowed in the valley. Now, if the plowshare, which is also called a coulter, which is the cutting tool on the bottom part of the plow. And here's a lovely little image, I guess, from Egypt. Seems very Egyptian, all right, of a person guiding the plow, which is being pulled by the cow, or usually an ox. And the plow, right, the plowshare is the metal part that goes into the ground and creates the furrows, right? You're creating the furrows so that you can plant, turn over the soil, etc., so that you can bring in your crop, right? Okay, so the plowshare is that iron part, right? The plow itself is usually made out of wood, but it's this metal cutting tool that is dragged through the soil. In that image, you have the same person who is, holding, steering, and sort of pushing into the ground the plow. It's hard work. Also holding the goad, right? That is going to just make the ox go or the cow go forward. But often this is done with a team where one person, his job is just to push the plow into the ground, and the driver or goader is next to or in front of the cow and guiding it to make a straight furrow, right? The cow by itself is not necessarily going to walk in a straight line, and it would be a lot to concentrate on keeping, the plow in the ground while the cow is pulling it and be steering the cow. I'm sure some people have that skill, and there are farmers, over the centuries who've obviously done it on their own. But it's also very helpful to do a team of two people where one is steering the cow, the other one can just focus on the plowing itself. Okay, so he rented the cow to plow on a mountain, but he plowed in the valley. If the plowshare breaks, he is exempt, as it was even more likely to break on mountainous terrain. Plowshares break, but in a valley where the dirt tends to be softer, it's a safer place. In other words, if you rented it and said, I'm going to use it on the mountain, like what you're really saying is that's the worst of what I'm going to do, would be plowing on a mountain. If you take it into a valley, you're putting less wear and tear on the plowshare. But in a case where he rents the cow and the plow to plow in the valley, but instead, right, that's what he told the owner, but instead he plowed on the mountain. So then if the plowshare breaks, he is liable. If he hired the cow to thresh legumes, but instead it threshed grain, and the cow slipped and broke its leg, he is exempt. But if he hired it to thresh grain, but instead thresh legumes, then he is liable because legumes are slippery, right? Grain is dry. Legumes tend to have moisture locked inside of them. So when you're threshing, right, using the cow's feet to crush what they're walking around in on the threshing room floor, you're making a very slippery type of situation. And if the cow slips and breaks its leg, that's a big loss to the owner of the cow. Then you would be liable because you said it's going to thresh in a much safer situation, grain, and you took it into the more heavy duty, more dangerous situation for the cow of threshing legumes. That's Mishnah number 3. The Gemara. The Mishnah discussed the liability of a renter who diverged from the terms of the rental agreement, but it does not teach the halacha, the law of liability for broken machinery in a case where the renter did follow the agreement. So now the Gemara, the Mishnah is not that difficult to understand. So the Gemara is actually going to extrapolate a question, not make a question on what was said, but on what was not said. So the Gemara asks, okay, in a case where the renter did not diverge from the agreement, right? So the renter said, I'm going to plow on a mountain, and he plowed on a mountain. And if he said, I'm going to plow in the valley, and then he plowed in the valley. So it would seem like, well, what's the question? He did exactly what he said he was going to do. Why would we think that he would be liable? He shouldn't be liable because he stayed within the terms of the agreement. Rav Papa said, the one who holds the goad pays, as it can be assumed that he caused the plow to break by not leading it in a straight path. Right? So what are we saying here? What do you mean, the one who holds the goad? So now we're saying it's the renter, right? It's the renter because it's the people who rented the cow who are going to be liable. Why would they be liable, right? I thought if you did what you said you were going to do, why would anybody be liable? Answer, because they said they're going to plow on a mountain, and they plowed on a mountain, or in a valley and they plowed in a valley, but they then were negligent. Okay, so that's what's going on here. It's not that the negligence lay in diverting or diverging from the agreed upon, purpose of the cow and the plow, but rather that, they used it in the correct location, but in that location, they used it improperly. So now the plowshare breaks, right? And it was something abnormal that happened. Basically, the plowshare was plowing in an area where it was too many rocks, too difficult, broke the plowshare, right? So it was beyond the capacity of the plowshare. They did something that was beyond the capacity of the plowshare. So I told you before, one guy's driving the cow and the other one is pushing the plowshare into the ground. So which one of those two people is going to be more responsible? Let's say that somebody rented the cow and the plow, and then he hired laborers to run it, right? One leading the cow and one pushing the plow into the ground, and the plowshare breaks. So who is more responsible? The one who drives the cow or the one who pushes the plowshare into the ground? So Rav Papa said the one who holds the goad, meaning the one who drives the cow, pays, as it can be assumed that he caused the plow to break by not leading it in a straight path. Rav Shesha, the son of Rav Edi, said the one who holds the vessel, meaning the plow itself. What broke? The plow, right? Well, it wasn't the harness. It wasn't the material, the leather straps around the cow's head, which maybe the driver of the cow was holding as he was goading it along, but rather it was the plow itself. And there's one guy who's holding the plow. Must be his fault, says Rav Shesha, the son of Rav Edi. The one who holds the vessel that broke pays. And the law is that the one who holds the vessel pays. And if it was a place where rocks are commonly found, they both pay. As in this case, any small irregularity in the ground where the plow digs a furrow is likely to cause the plow to break. In other words, why would the one who's holding the vessel be liable? Probably because he didn't know how to do it. You're supposed to plow at a certain depth, whatever it is, 6 inches, 8 inches, a foot. And this guy's inexperienced, and he let the plow go much deeper. Right now, it's much deeper, and in that area, it's known that at a certain depth, there's a lot of rocks. okay, he should have known better, he didn't do it correctly, and that's why the plow broke. On the other hand, if it's semi-rocky and it's known that you're going to need a certain depth and straight lines, or you're going to endanger the plow, okay, then we can say that both of them would be liable. Rabbi Yochanan says, citing the Tosefta in Bava Basra 4:6, in a case of one who sells a cow to another person and says to him, you should know that this cow has defects. And now really, this is a total digression. I mean, what does this have to do with renting a cow and a plow for an intended purpose, and then you use it for a different purpose? Now we're switching over to the law of buying and selling, and that the seller is making full disclosure of defects that are in the animal that he's selling. It's really a very different subject, but that's what's happening. So in a case of one who sells a cow to another and says to him, you should know that this cow has defects. It is accustomed to goring, it is accustomed to biting, it is a kicker, it lies down habitually, but in reality, it had only one defect, and he inserted it among the list of defects that it did not have. So this is a mistaken transaction, because the buyer saw that it did not have the other defects, and therefore he did not take seriously any of the defects that the seller enumerated, including the one that the cow actually had. Right? It's very interesting. This is a way of the guy who's selling the cow knows that it has an important defect, and that he should disclose that. And if he doesn't, then if the buyer, once after paying the money, discovers that defect, he can unwind the sale and say that was a sale in error, a mistaken transaction, meaning that he can go back to the seller and get his money back. That's what it means. So the seller knows that he has to disclose this defect. On the other hand, he knows that if he discloses the important defect, perhaps that the cow is a gorer, right, that the ox is a gorer, that he won't be able to sell it. So what he does instead, being sneaky and cunning, is he includes the known defect among a bunch of imaginary defects, false defects, defects that the ox does not have. Now, because he makes his whole list of defects, and most of which are obviously not present. So the buyer says, okay, well, this guy's just listing all the defects in case one of them should happen to be there, but I can immediately see that, the three obvious defects that he just named aren't there. It must be that he's just covering his butt, but there's really no defects, and he buys the cow, and then he discovers, the one defect that is there is a serious defect, and the sages say that is a mistaken transaction, meaning he can get his money back. Because this, adding all these sort of false defects being disclosed when they're actually not there was actually a cunning way to hide the real defect that is there. On the other hand, the Gemara notes that this is also taught, and the Gemara notes that this is also taught in a baraisa with regard to one who sells, and then whereas, so what I just said, whereas, right, but if the seller stated the animal has one defect, i.e. the defect that it in fact has, and other defects. It says this animal is a gorer and it has other defects too, without specifying what the other defects were, and the seller goes ahead, the buyer goes ahead and purchases, then this is not a mistaken transaction, and the buyer can't later say, well, he, included this known defect, this important defect among a bunch of other defects, and that, and that's why I didn't really look at it carefully. I didn't think there were any defects, and so I bought the cow. Because in this case, the guy might have been covering his butt by saying there's other defects, but he didn't even name what they were. But the important defect, he said, he disclosed that. So the buyer was on notice, and he decided to go ahead with the purchase anyway. He can't claim that it was a transaction made in error. And now the Gemara notes that this is also taught in a baraisa, Tosefta Bava Basra 4:3, with regard to one who sells a maidservant, right? So tragically, slavery was once legal. It was the most common thing in the ancient world. The Torah came and limited what a slave owner could do and gave slaves rights that they had never had before. Nevertheless, when slavery did exist, it was a kind of purchase and sale transaction. So here they're talking about that law. With regard to one who sells a female slave, a maidservant, to another, and says to him, this maidservant is an imbecile, she is epileptic, she is crazy. The word for that is meshuamemet. But in reality, she had only one defect, and he inserted it among the other defects. This is a mistaken transaction. But if the seller stated the maidservant has this one important defect, which he names, and other defects, which he just tosses off without even saying what they are, and the buyer goes ahead and buys anyway, then he cannot later claim this was a transaction made in error. And Rav Acha, the son of Rava, said to Rav Ashi, if the animal had all of these defects, what is the law in that case? Can the buyer claim to have thought that the seller was not serious when he mentioned so many problems? And Rav Mordechai said to Rav Ashi, we say this law in the name of Rava. If the animal had all these defects, it is not a mistaken transaction, as he was forthright. The seller is not at fault if the buyer did not believe him. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 3. Mishnah 4. With regard to one who rents a donkey in order to bring wheat on it, meaning transport it on its back, and he brought upon it an identical weight of barley, which is lighter than wheat, right? If barley is lighter than wheat, and he's transporting the same amount of it on the animal, the same weight of it on the animal, so that tells you that it's going to be bulkier, right? It's going to be a wider load. And the donkey was injured, he is liable, right? Because he said he was going to transport one thing, he transported something different. And even though it's the same amount of weight, now that he's transporting something that is bulkier, that is more likely to cause injury to the donkey, because it's the center of balance. I mean, the extremes of the load are wider, so the donkey now has a tougher time balancing itself, especially on narrow, hilly, rocky terrain, or walking past objects that could get caught on the load. And so it's a more dangerous thing to transport for the donkey. And it was not what they agreed upon, so the renter is liable. And similarly, if he hired it for transporting grain and he brought straw of the same weight upon it, he is liable, because the extra volume, right, same weight, greater volume, is difficult, or is as difficult for the animal as the load itself. Now, if he rented a donkey in order to bring on it a letech, i.e. a measurement of volume of wheat, but he brought a letech of barley, so he is exempt, as he brought the same volume of a lighter substance. So he didn't add to the problems of the donkey. It's the same width of load and less weight. So sure, he's going to be liable. Of course, he's going to be exempt because he made it easier on the donkey, not harder. And one who adds to a load a greater volume than he stipulated is liable. And how much must he add to the load for him to be liable? Sumakos says, in the name of Rabbi Meir, a sa on a camel and 3 kav on a donkey. A sa is 6 kav. So a camel is a larger, stronger animal than a donkey. So the amount that you have to add to it before you become liable for adding excess baggage, which then if the animal is injured, you're liable for it, is a larger volume on a camel than it would be on a donkey. But more or less, since a letech, is about, what was it? It was, I think it was 15 sa. Now I forget the numbers, but the point is that basically he's adding it's a small amount oversize or overweight, about 1/30th, right? So the point is he loaded it up to the absolute limit that he could rent it for, and then he added more, right? And it's a small amount, just 1/30th, right? Like 3%, a little bit more than 3%. But that is enough to say, well, you are excess baggage, right? Either excess weight or excess volume, more than we agreed to, and so you're going to be liable if the animal is injured. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. it was stated that the Amoraim, the sages of the Gemara, disagreed about the precise text of this Mishnah. Abaye said that we learned in the Mishnah, difficult as the load. And Rava said that we learned difficult for the load. And the Gemara explains. Abaye said that we learned difficult as the load, with the meaning that volume is like weight. And therefore, when the volume of the two substances is equal, if one adds 3 kav, he is liable. Kav is a volume, a measure of volume. Rava said that we learn difficult for the load, with the meaning that if one weight is like the other weight, then the difference in volume is already considered an addition. In other words, one is liable if the weight of the barley is the same as that of the wheat, in which case the additional volume is considered to cause damage. And Rava holds that if the volume of the two is equal, one is not liable for the additional 3 kav of weight, but more than that he would be. Now the Gemara attempts to cite a proof for one of these opinions. We learned in the Mishnah, if one hired a donkey to bring a letech of wheat, but he brought a letech of barley, he is exempt. And one who adds to a load a greater volume than he stipulated is liable. I think a letech is half a core, is how this works. Is liable. And what? Is it not correct that this means he did not bring exactly a letech of barley, but he added 3 kav, which would support the opinion of Abaye? And the Gemara refutes this interpretation. No, he added a whole sup. And the Gemara asks, but the continuation of the Mishnah was taught concerning this case. How much must he add to the load for him to be liable? And Sumako says in the name of Rabbi Meir, a sa on a camel and 3 kav on a donkey. And the Gemara explains that this is what the last clause of the Mishnah is saying. In a case where the renter did not diverge from their agreement, for example, they stipulated that he would bring wheat and he brought wheat, or they stipulated that he would bring barley and he brought barley. How much must he add to the load for him to be liable? Right? He didn't change the terms in terms of like where he was going to transport it, mountain versus valley. He didn't change the terms in terms of what he was going to transport, wheat versus barley. But what he changed was the amount that he is transporting on the animal, either because he increased the volume or because he increased the weight. So the Gemara further suggests, coming here, a proof from a baraisa. If one hired a donkey to bring a letech, which is 15 sa of wheat, and a core is 30 sa of wheat. So if one hired a donkey to bring a letech, which is 15 sa of wheat, but he brought 16 sa of barley, then he is liable. And this indicates that if he added only 3 kav, i.e. half a sa, he is exempt. So Abaye interpreted the baraita as referring to smoothed over barley, a precisely measured load, where the volume of the barley was not measured with heaped measuring utensils, but leveled flat. So consequently, it is roughly a sa less than the usual amount. Now we're on page 80b. Now the sages taught a kav is too large an amount. It's too large an addition for a porter. So now we've been talking about hiring donkeys or camels. Now we're switching over for a porter, a human who's going to carry stuff for you. So if you add a kav, less than a kav, you're not going to be deemed liable for adding too much weight to a donkey. But if you add a kav to your human porter who's carrying stuff for you, and therefore if the porter is injured by the additional weight, the owner must pay him. And an adriv, which is half a core, is too large an addition for a small boat, known as an areva. And a core is too large an addition for a regular boat. And 3 core is too large an addition for a large ship, right? In other words, these are the set volumes or weights that you can add to a load, where if you added more than that, then you made yourself liable for any damage that results because you overloaded either the beast of burden or the human who's carrying it for you or the boat that is transporting it for you, whether it's a small boat, a medium boat, or a ship. Now the master said, a kav is too large an addition for a porter. And the Gemara asks, if it is so that he cannot withstand this load, the porter is a sensible person. Let him throw it off and avoid injury. right? A boat can't decide for itself whether it was overloaded. A donkey or a camel don't decide for themselves because they don't have conscious thinking brains the way humans do. But a human porter, he knows how much he can carry. So if he's overloaded, why didn't he just say, this is too much weight for me to carry? Why didn't he speak up? If he didn't speak up, maybe we shouldn't hold liable the one who gave him extra stuff to carry. And so Abaye said, well, actually, this is referring to a case where the load knocked him down immediately before he could even remove it from his back, before he could even say this is too much weight. As soon as he picked it up, it was too heavy and he got injured. Rava said, even if you say this is referring to a case where it did not knock him down immediately, still the barais is not difficult, and it is necessary to say this only with regard to the extra pay that a porter can demand for having additional weight. And Rav Ashi said, even if the porter is a sensible man, meaning a thinking human, perhaps he thought it was a momentary weakness that seized him, and he did not realize that the load itself was excessive. I mean, yeah, we're talking about a small difference where you just come over the limit of what you can load on this person. Moreover, I mean, we could say that there's porters and there are porters, right? Some are bigger, some are stronger, some have more endurance. But even if you say that this is a guy who's very experienced and should know just by feel how much he's carrying, okay, well, maybe he was having a bad day. Maybe he hadn't eaten in a few hours. And when it felt heavy to him, he thought, it must be that I'm not feeling good. I didn't have a big enough breakfast. And that's why it feels heavy. And he just wants to do a good job. But then it turns out that he was overloaded. Don't blame him. The owner is liable. And the Baraisa teaches a core is too large in addition for a regular boat. 3 core is too large in addition, right? Meaning you get into the excess baggage where you're liable for damage for a large ship. Rav Papa said, learn from here that unspecified boats can bear 30 core, i.e. this is the volume of a ship's cargo. And the reason for this claim is that in all these cases, the addition that causes damage is 1/30th of the normal load. And the Gemara asks, what is the practical difference resulting from this observation? And the Gemara answers, the difference is with regard to the laws of buying and selling, i.e. one who purchases a boat of unspecified dimensions should know that this is its expected capacity, and if it's going to be less than that, then the seller should have disclosed it. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 4 here in chapter 6. Mishnah 5. All artisans and laborers who take raw materials to their homes are considered paid bailees for those items until they return them to the owner, right? So we've talked about that there are 4 classes of shomer, right, of custodian. In other words, there are 4 classes of people who bear different levels of liability for objects that are entrusted to their care. There is the paid bailee, someone who is paid to watch the item. The unpaid bailee, the one who is watching that item as a favor to the one who asked him to watch it. There's the borrower, right? Someone who borrows an item and it is now in his care, and the owner of the item did the borrower a favor. And then there is the renter, right, who pays in order to have the use of that item. So the one with the highest liability is the borrower. Anything that happens to the item when it's in his care, he's liable for it. The one with the lowest level of responsibility is the unpaid bailee, right? The unpaid shomer. The shomer who receives nothing for having it in his custody. And so basically, he's only going to be liable if he's truly negligent. And then the in-between case is the paid bailee and the renter. And practically speaking, the paid bailee and the renter have the same level of responsibility, which is that they're going to be liable if there's damage to that item that arises either from their own negligence or through avoidable loss, which is understood as loss, meaning avoidable loss, and theft, not circumstances beyond their control. It was in their control to keep it from being stolen. It was in their control to keep it from being lost in various ways. If they were assaulted by armed bandits, that's beyond their control. That's not theft. But if they didn't lock it up and keep someone watching it when it was their responsibility to do so, they would be liable. The case of the renter is interesting because the Torah, in the written Torah, does not specify exactly what the liability of the renter is. And so some say it's the liability of an unpaid bailee, and others say it's the responsibility of a paid bailee. And practically speaking, the law is, generally speaking, that the liability of a renter is like that of a paid bailee. Okay, now what we're talking about is an artisan. For example, I bring my shoes to the cobbler, right, to repair my shoes or to improve my shoes. So while my shoes are at the shoemaker's shop, the shoe repair shop, he's got my shoes. So what if something happens to my shoes while they're there, right? What if, like, when the guy isn't looking, somebody comes in, sneaks in and takes them? Theft. So is he going to be liable like a paid bailee, or is he going to be not liable like an unpaid bailee? So all artisans and laborers who take raw materials to their homes are considered paid bailees. After all, they're getting paid for whatever they're doing with this item. And so while it's in their home, they are paid bailees for those items until they return them to the owner. And with regard to all those who said to the owner, I finished the work, and therefore take what is yours, i.e. this item, and bring the money in its stead. I finished the work, pay me, and take your item back. From that point on, from when they say the item is finished, please pay me and take it away, from then on, even before they get paid and before the owner picks up the shoes, for example, now they have the level of liability of an unpaid bailee because they're no longer working on it. They've given notice, come pick up your shoes. Now, if the owner delays in coming to pick up the shoes, the guy in the shoe shop is going to say, hey, you should have come and picked them up. I was just watching them for you as a favor at that point. If one person says to another, safeguard my property for me, and I will safeguard your property for you, well, then each of them is a paid bailee, as each receives the services of the other as payment for his safeguarding. If one of them says, safeguard for me, and the other says to him, place it before me, the second individual is an unpaid bailee. One who lent to another based on collateral is a paid bailee for the collateral. If he's holding the collateral while the loan is outstanding, then he is considered a paid bailee because that collateral is securing the loan for him. He's getting benefit from it. Rabbi Yehuda says one who lent another money is an unpaid bailee for the collateral, whereas one who lent another produce is a paid bailee. Abba Shaul says it is permitted for a person to rent out a poor person's collateral that was given to him for a loan, so that by setting a rental price for it, he will thereby progressively reduce the debt, i.e. the lender will subtract the rental money he receives from the amount owed by the borrower, which he's doing a service to the borrower by doing this, because this is like considered returning a lost item. The borrower profits from this arrangement, whereas the lender does not use the collateral in this manner. It provides a benefit to no one. That's Mishnah number 5. Now the Gemara. The Gemara suggests, let us say that the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, as it is taught in a baraisa with regard to a renter whose legal status is not stated explicitly in the Torah. How does he pay in the event that a rented article is lost or stolen? Rabbi Meir says he pays like an unpaid bailee, i.e. only in the cases where the loss of the item was due to his negligence. Rabbi Yehuda says he pays like a paid bailee, even in cases where the loss of the item was not due to his negligence. He is like a paid bailee. A renter is like a paid bailee, and this is a famous machloket, a famous dispute between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. And in practice, the law is like Rabbi Yehuda, that the renter has the level of liability of a paid bailee. Skilled laborers are similar to renters, as they take possession of the item in order to profit from it. Right? If I give my shoes to the skilled shoe repairman, I'm going to pay him, right, for fixing my shoes. So he's benefiting from having the shoes in his care so that he can fix them and get paid for that. And so says Rabbi Yehuda, since he's benefiting from it, he's not like an unpaid bailee, he's like a paid bailee. Consequently, the ruling of the Mishnah is apparently not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, right? So if we're saying that an artisan is like a paid bailee, and that is like a renter, so that seems to be like Rabbi Yehuda, not like Rabbi Meir. Now the Gemara rejects this claim. Well, you may even say that our Mishnah about a craftsman is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. And the reason that skilled laborers are considered like paid bailees is that through that benefit that the worker receives from the fact that the owner of the item leaves aside everyone else and hires him, he becomes a paid bailee over the item. It's not that he's benefiting from having the item in his care, it's that he's benefiting from the owner of the shoes choosing him to bring the item for improvement or repair. And that's the benefit that makes him like a paid bailee. Not the fact that it's in his care, but the fact that it was brought to him. And the Gemara challenges this reasoning. Well, if so, with regard to a renter as well, it can be said that through that benefit he receives from the fact that the owner leaves aside everyone else and rents to him, right? The owner chose to rent to him. I mean, this is not a far-fetched thing at all. In a city where it's difficult to get apartments, and every time a landlord lists an apartment for rent, he gets a bunch of people applying, and then he chooses one of them to become his tenant. So that's a benefit that the renter received. And so the renter is like a paid bailee. Now, rather, in light of this refutation, the Gemara suggests a different reason, that you may even say that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who likens renters to unpaid bailees, but we can say that an artisan is not like a renter, and that's why this would still accord with Rabbi Meir. So through that benefit that the skilled laborer receives from the fact that the owner gives him a little more money, he becomes a paid bailee. Since it is impossible to calculate the precise sum to which a skilled laborer is entitled, it is assumed that he is slightly overpaid. In other words, when I take my shoes to the cobbler to repair them, and we agreed that I'm going to pay him $10 to put a new pair of heels on my shoes that I'm going to pick up next week, I'm actually paying him $9.50 to, attach the new heels, and 50 cents to watch over my shoes until I come and get them. How can you say that the $10 doesn't include some kind of a fee for being a paid bailee? And it's not because simply being a craftsman in possession of the shoes that he's repairing makes him a paid bailee. It's because he's actually getting paid to be a paid bailee. Now the Gemara asks, with regard to a renter as well, are we not dealing even with a case where the owner gives him a little more value for his money, and yet Rabbi Meir claims that he is considered like an unpaid bailee? Rather, you may even say that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir for a different reason. Through that benefit that the skilled laborer receives from the fact that he holds onto the items so that he is not required to go in and go out for his money, he becomes a paid bailee, right? Another benefit that a craftsman has over having your shoes in his shop after he fixes them, after he performs labor on them, is that they act as a security for him that the owner is indeed going to return and pay him for the work that he did because he wants to get his shoes back. So having the shoes present means that he's not going to have to go, hound and chase the owner of the shoes in order to get paid, because the owner's going to want to get his shoes back. That's a benefit. And if you wish, say instead that the Mishnah can be explained in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir without these explanations, as Rabba bar Abu reversed the opinions and teaches that the Baraisa says, with regard to a renter, how does he pay? Rabbi Meir says like a paid bailee, and Rabbi Yehuda says like an unpaid bailee. But we don't do that. The fact is, Rabbi Yehuda says like a paid bailee, a renter is like a paid bailee. That's the way the law is. And an artisan is like a paid bailee until he says, take your stuff. Then he's no longer a paid bailee. The Mishnah teaches, and in the case of all those who said to the owner, take what is yours, i.e. this item, and bring money in its stead, so each of them is then considered an unpaid bailee. They don't want to watch it anymore. Now, the longer it sits in the shop, it's annoying for them, and they're just waiting for you to come and take it away. So we learned in the Mishnah there on page 98b, we'll come to it, right, in a few weeks. If the owner said to the lender, send the animal that you agreed to lend me with the person whom you said would deliver it, and he sent it to him, and it died on the way, so the borrower is liable. And similarly, when he returns it, the borrower is responsible for the animal as long as it has not actually been returned to the owner, because the borrower said, send the animal to me that I'm going to borrow with my messenger that I'm going to send to pick up the animal. So of course, as soon as the borrower's messenger, meaning the borrower's agent, picks up the animal is in the possession of the borrower. And if something happens to the animal, the borrower is liable. And remember, the borrower has the highest degree of responsibility because the lender is not receiving any benefit for lending out his animal. So if anything happens to the animal, the borrower is responsible. Now, Rav from Bar Papa said that Rav Chisda said they taught this law only when the borrower returned it during the period of its loan, as he accepted responsibility for the animal for the stipulated duration of the loan. But if he returned it after the period of its loan, he is exempt, as once the duration of the loan is complete, he no longer has the status of a borrower. What? If the borrower is late in returning it, he's exempt from the liability of a borrower? Why would he benefit from being late in returning it and no longer bear the liability of a borrower? Because once he's borrowing an item beyond the time that it was agreed between the borrower and the lender that he could borrow it, and he's still keeping it, what has he become? A robber. And a robber has even greater liability if something happens to it. He's going to have to pay double. But if he returned it after the period of its loan, he is exempt, as once the duration of the loan is complete, he no longer has the status of a borrower. Rav Nachman Bar Papa raised an objection from the Mishnah and all those who said, take what is yours and bring money. Each of them is considered an unpaid bailee. This indicates that if the skilled laborer said only, I completed the work with it, he is considered a paid bailee. Even after he completes the work, the item remains within his responsibility. And the Gemara rejects this line of reasoning. No, this is not what you should have deducted from the Mishnah. Rather, the correct deduction is that as soon as the craftsman says, give money first and then take what is yours, he is a paid bailee, right? If he simply said, take it, right? I'm done working with it, take it. He is no longer a paid bailee, right? He doesn't want it in his possession anymore. He's saying, now he added, and pay me, because that's just normal. So then we're saying he's still an unpaid bailee at that point. But if he first said, give me the money, and then you can take it, okay, well then he's still using it as security to get paid, and that's why you could say that he's still a paid bailee. And the Gemara asks, but if that is the case, when one says only, I completed the work with it, right? All he says is, I finished. So he didn't say take it. He didn't say pay me and then take it. He didn't say take it and then pay me. All he said is, you brought the shoes to me to fix them, I fixed them. So at that point, while the shoes are still in his care, is he a paid bailee or an unpaid bailee? I completed the work. So then what is the law? Is he considered an unpaid bailee? If so, then teaching a new law in the Mishnah where it says, and all those who say, take what is yours and bring money, so each of them is considered an unpaid bailee. That's what the Mishnah said. The Mishnah should have said, I completed the work with it. Why add, I completed the work and now pay me? Once he said, I completed the work, he becomes like an unpaid bailee. He doesn't want to be like a paid bailee. He doesn't want to have greater responsibility. Once he says, I finished the work, he's an unpaid bailee. What difference does it make if he adds, and then you should pay me and take it away? Now, the Gemara rejects it. So maybe when he says, so maybe it's not enough to say, I finished the work. Right? So the Gemara rejects this line of reasoning. The case of take what is yours must be taught explicitly. Otherwise, it might enter your mind to say that once he issues this statement, he is not considered even an unpaid bailee and retains no responsibility whatsoever for the item. We are on page 81a now, getting a little head start. Therefore, the Mishnah teaches us that even in this case, he is still considered an unpaid bailee, and he continues to bear only the responsibilities of an unpaid bailee, but at least he has those responsibilities. If he's negligent, he is going to be liable. You might have thought that he bears no responsibility whatsoever. That is not the case. He is an unpaid bailee. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. There are those who say that there is a different version of this discussion. Rather than challenging that Rav Chisda's opinion is opposed by the ruling of the Mishnah, Rav Nachman bar Papa said, we too learn a proof from Rav Chisda's statement from the Mishnah, and all those who say, take what is yours and bring money, each of them is considered an unpaid bailee. That's what the Mishnah said. And what? Is it not correct to say that the same is true when the craftsman says, I have completed the work with it? And the Gemara says, no. The case of one who says, take what is yours, is different than one who says, I've completed the work, as stated above, as one might think that the statement frees the laborer of all responsibility. And the Gemara cites a third version of this discussion. Huna Mar bar Marimar raised a contradiction between the Mishnayos before Ravina and resolved it himself. We learned in the Mishnah, and all those who say, take what is yours and bring money, each of them is considered an unpaid bailee. And apparently the same is true for one who said, I completed the work with it. And Huna bar Marimar raises a contradiction from the aforementioned Mishnah. If the borrower said to the lender, send the animal to me, and he sent it to him and it died on the way, the borrower is liable. And similarly, when he returns it, and he resolves this contradiction in accordance with that which Rafram bar Papa said that Rav Chisda said. They taught this law only when he returned it during the period of its loan, but if he returned it after the period of its loan, he is exempt as a borrower, right? He might become liable as a robber. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll continue again tomorrow, Monday, regular Monday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Do I have any questions? Apparently not. Okay, looks like there are no questions. Maybe something went wrong in the communication between me and Nina. No, looks like there are no questions. Okay, that's it. Thank you, everybody. Look forward to learning with you again.